Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank the witnesses, and I'd first disagree with Mr. Deutsch on the statement that the federal government hasn't funded abortions for 30 years, and I'd ask Mr. Dorflinger if he could speak to that.
Yes, sir. It's 35 years that the federal government has been barred from using federal funds for the vast majority of abortions. What has changed, what's new, and it's not a new, effort by a cabal of mean-spirited, conspirators, as Dr. Wood would like to say, it is that federal funds have now moved into a vastly broader arena of the healthcare system. We're no longer talking about Medicaid just for the poor. We're talking about SAC subsidies for the middle class, who, by the way, are presumably far more able than the poor to use their own money for abortion if they're not getting federal funds.
But I'd ask you if I could back
now
this
we're
up,
beginning to get into.
If you could back this up 30 or 35 years and speak to Medicaid funding of abortions for rape and incest, and funding for Planned Parenthood while we're at it.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand.
Okay, first of all, has the federal government funded abortion through Medicaid funding in the cases of rape and incest over the last 30 years?
For many years.
And so those would be exceptions to Mr. Deutsch's statement. We have,
certainly,
as the federal government, I don't want to say we in this case, the federal government has consistently funded abortion throughout all of the states under Medicaid funding for the cases of rape and incest.
Yes.
I thank you. And then we look at something like, I'm pulling this number out of my head, I'll say in the upper $300+ million a year that goes into Planned Parenthood. Is there a way that one could contrive to make the argument that none of that funding goes to abortion, that funds Planned Parenthood?
Well, the Title X Family Planning Program says that none of those funds can go to a program where abortion is a method of family planning. I don't have evidence that those funds are being directed toward abortion. I think what Planned Parenthood usually does is have its Title X program on family planning done at one clinic, and then that clinic refers women for abortions to another Planned Parenthood clinic that is not a Title X clinic and does the abortions. So there's some separation. But even that Title X program, 1970 it dates from, put the funding band broader than just the procedure of abortion itself. We don't want to put federal funds into a program where these are done. So the idea that, by just not funding the abortion procedure itself and taking that dollar out and switching it around, that respects, the history of American law in this program, in this area is not true. And
you wouldn't have to have a PhD in money fungibility in order to figure out that $370-some million, some of that spills over into funding abortion through Planned Parenthood, even if it goes into administrative funds that, in a broader perspective, administer the upper side of that program.
Well, I don't want to get into funding Planned Parenthood. I think that's a different issue. But
I'm happy to change the subject, and I thank you for your response.
It is a little bit, but it's relevant to this extent that by giving all this money to Planned Parenthood, we are giving money to the organization that does hundreds of thousands of abortions a year, more than any other. And I, for one, would like to see those funds devoted to organizations that are more clearly committed to the needs of women as well as their children.
I would agree, and I thank you. And I turn to Ms. Wood, and thinking back in your testimony, and part of your testimony was a statement to the effect of that, for a case of some women, abortion care costs more than their monthly rent. I have trouble calculating that equation, and could you explain that statement to the committee?
Yes. Particularly because of the nature of the very narrow exceptions that are allowed under H.R. 7, which is life endangerment, rape, or incest, that those women who have health concerns or fetal abnormalities may be facing later-term abortions, which can cost in the thousands of dollars.
Okay, your answer then would be, in exceptional cases, it may cost a woman more for a single abortion than it does for her 1 month of rent check. Is that an accurate way to depict what you said?
That's correct.
Okay, because I wonder how many abortions a month does she need at the going rate to keep up with the rent check.
But we do know that it pushes women into poverty.
I accept your answer, and I think it's fine. I want to, in the seconds I have left, speak to this issue because I have an opportunity to speak to it from the perspective of the church. And I'm a Roman Catholic. I believe in good standing with the Church and a faithful follower of much of the teachings. I was very concerned about the Catholic Church's involvement in the Obamacare legislation as it moved through this Congress and the accepting of the Stupak Amendment. Here in the middle of this political arena, I believe that the Church was operating in a legislative arena that they didn't quite understand, that they didn't see that there was going to be a bait and switch on the Stupak Amendment. That's what happened. And I think the Church's desire on the principle of trying to serve people and trying to get more people covered by health insurance, the things that you talked about, Mr. Dorflinger, about the dignity of every human person, which I believe. I think they got too far ahead of themselves on this and failed to understand that abortion was going to be part of this package, and that Rahm Emanuel is the person that came up with the executive order that was going to amend Obamacare after the fact. And so I wanted to make this point in this hearing, that I'd ask the Church to come talk to some of us on the inside of these chambers when these things come up, and understand that we should first put the principle, it is the Church's principle, of life first, and remember there's a principle of subsidiarity too. And we can serve people better many times the closer to the individuals that we can get those services than going broadly with a national policy that turns this over to a pro-abortion president. And my heart is sick at what's happened with Obamacare. The conscience protection, the